Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to episode 249. In episode 248, I discussed the danger that the beauty and cosmetic industry poses to us and to our health. And this episode and the next several episodes, I will be sharing with the Nora Speaks audience the challenges and the threats that we face from what we are eating on a daily basis. And this episode is titled Real Food versus Food Products. And I think it's important for the Nora Speaks audience to know the real danger that we face by what is provided to us, some of which is, USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA approved, USDA authorized, FDA, Food and Drug Administration, Food and Drug Administration approved. We may be surprised with the real threat to our health from what we are consuming on a daily basis and several times a day. And in this particular episode, Real Food versus Food Products, we're going to be discussing the food categories of processed food, because it's important that we know that the processed food and the ultra processed foods that we're eating is linked to increased risk for cancers, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, depression, and anxiety. I mean, these foods that we're eating daily pose health risk and long-term health implications for us. If you watch any of the documentaries on food, What the Health comes to mind. There's a documentary, I can't think of the name at this time, but it's where the guy ate McDonald's, I think, for a month's time, and how his health changed, and not for the better. In What the Health, they really go over quite descriptively and graphically where our food is coming from. And so there's so much that we don't know about our food, and we're going to be discussing that in these upcoming, this episode and the upcoming episodes. And so I want to start us off with understanding terms. In this episode, you may hear me refer to whole foods, or as I say in the title, real foods. And there's a difference between real foods and food products, or whole foods and food products. Whole foods have whole food ingredients. They are foods that come from nature, such as fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds. They're considered real food, like a grape, like an orange, like a red pepper. These foods don't have artificial additives, coloring, flavoring, or preservative. They are not modified in any way that alters the nutritional value. These are real foods, unadulterated, unchanged, right? Maybe we can say holy, right? Because they're pure. So there's a difference between whole foods, real foods, and food products. Now, what are food products? Food products are not real food, first of all, but these are items that have various degrees of processing. They have artificial ingredients. They are foods that have additives. They are substitutes. They have imitation flavoring. And the substitutes and the additives that are added to these foods are created to imitate the real flavor and the texture of natural foods or whole foods, right? So they're made to imitate real or whole foods. And more often than not, they lack substantial nutritional value. And I'll kind of explain why they don't have nutritional value as we go on. And so examples of food products include the breakfast cereals that we're told are part of a nutritious diet. And also they have coloring added to them, flavoring added to them. Frozen dinners are an example of food products, not real foods. And so these food products, the reason why they lack nutritional value is because of the processing that they are, by which they're created. I mean, many of them are industrial products, right? Not something that's coming from a farm, but something that's coming from a chemical plant. And sometimes when we look at the labels, we can't pronounce them because they are in fact chemicals, right? You think that you're in a chemistry lab and not thinking about what, we're going to be putting on our plate. We're trying to decode or decipher these long terms on the packaging and labeling of these food products, and we don't quite understand what the heck we're putting in our bodies, right? So because of the extensive processing, and the processing strips these real foods of the things that make them inherently healthy and natural, and that's why they are they're lacking nutritional value and can pose a danger to us. Examples like the artificial sweeteners, the processed cheeses, the imitation meats. They're heavily modified, and they are created often using industrial or synthetic methods. And now I do want to say that some of the good things that we eat have undergone some processing. And I'm going to give you an example as I go through the four groups of processed foods, right? Group 1 is the unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Group 2 are the processed culinary ingredients. Group 3 are processed foods, and Group 4 are ultra processed foods. And I'm going to break down each group. Starting with Group 1, the unprocessed or minimally processed foods. This group includes fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, and they can be processed by way of chopping, washing, and these foods have their nutrients and their nutritional value maintained. So an example might be the green beans that we buy from the frozen food section, right? They're picked and they're frozen. An example of the Group 1 minimally processed foods could be dried raisins, right? Which are, dried, or figs that are dried, coffee beans that are roasted, things that are ground like seeds in our teas, or peppercorns, for example, right? I've made, peppercorn salmon, at home for my family. And it's just the round peppercorn that's made, that's on the salmon that coats it, right? But when we are seasoning our foods with a pepper grinder, that peppercorn is being ground. And that's an example of being minimally processed. And so even with that example of either adding the whole peppercorn to your food or grinding it, you can see how the nutritional value is not depleted just by that simple act of grinding it, which is a form of processing, but it's minimally processed. Now, Group 2 category, these are processed culinary ingredients. This process can include the pressing of food. Like you may have bought olive oil and you want it, the label to say pressed, right? Pressed oil. Or you may buy something and it's cold extracted, right? Honey, right? Something that's extracted, honey and like I think maple syrup, for example, right? Something that's extracted, something that's mined, like salt, something that's milled, like flour. And then we can also include spices that are ground in this example. But these are culinary ingredients that also have just very, very minimal processing. But these are natural foods, right? It is extracted. It is pressed. It is given to us still in its whole form. But I think about, if we want honey, we have to, we have to go and we have to go gather it, right? We have to, some people I know, beekeepers, right? And they have to go and get that honey. Maple syrup. Some things have to be tapped for us to extract it so that we can add it into our foods or into the ingredients that we're using to prepare foods. But the processing that these foods undergo do not deplete it of the nutritional value. Now, as we move on to the group 3 of processed foods, this is a category of foods that have added salt, added sugar, added oil, or other ingredients that increase the product's shelf life or enhance its taste, right? So these foods may be bottled, right? Like we may find olives, and I love olives, right? These foods may be canned, like beans or coconut cream or, canned corn or other vegetables. Now, what is allowing these foods to be canned and stay on a shelf for so long? It's from the way that they are processed. And a lot of times we understand that salt is added to increase the shelf life of foods, right? There may be foods like bread or cheeses that have non-alcoholic fermentation that increases shelf life or are used to create it. Some things that are packaged like fruit in fruit cups, sardines and soups, foods that are salted like nuts and seeds and pork, and foods that are smoked like, your Christmas or Thanksgiving ham, right? Or your smoked fish. These are group 3 processed foods. Now, here we come to the most dangerous group of processed foods called ultra processed foods. And these are foods that undergo a lot of processing and a lot of changing. And these are food-like substances. When I was talking about, real food versus food products, we're really here now talking about food products when we are discussing the ultra processed foods. Now, these are foods or food-like substances. They have the starch or protein extracted from them. And not only do they have the starch or protein and fiber extracted, but they also have added ingredients like dyes and thickeners and artificial flavors. And one of the reasons that ultra-processed foods are so prevalent in our supermarkets and in our homes because they're more affordable than less processed foods. Yet they do have a lower nutritional value. And unfortunately, this makes them very easy for us to overeat. Ultra-processed foods contain unhealthy fats and, as I mentioned, added sugars and excess salt. So, for example, the salty snacks that we like, the potato chips, the pretzels, the crackers, these are ultra-processed. The store-bought cakes, pastries, cookies, the packaged breads, they are ultra processed. The ready to eat meals, the frozen meals, even those fresh meals, I think about in the supermarket refrigerator section where they are, they'll have I'm trying to think of a restaurant like Olive Garden or something, right? And you can just have an Olive Garden meal. It's in a bag. All you got to do is put it in your saucepan and warm it up. That is an ultra processed food. And maybe I shouldn't use Olive Garden as an example because I don't know that they have these prepackaged foods, but I do know TGI Fridays does. So those are ultra processed foods. Frozen foods like pizza, chicken nuggets, the fast food that we eat are definitely ultra processed. If we were to look on the ingredient label for French fries, we would think, oh, potatoes, maybe potatoes and salt. Yeah, no, it's not just potatoes and salt. Take a look yourself. I don't want to do the work for you, but take a look yourself to see what's in the ingredient list for our chicken nuggets from McDonald's or Burger King, or look at the ingredients for the French fries from these stores, these fast food stores. Frozen desserts like our pies and ice cream, they are ultra processed food. Candy, sodas, condiments, ketchup, these are ultra processed foods. Ultra processed foods are mass produced foods, right? That are mass stocked in the stores, the cookies, the crackers, the pastas, soft drinks, and the frozen foods. They go through extensive processing. And the tricky part about the food labeling is that companies are allowed to be deceptive. For example, if you look on the back of a bottle of fruit punch or a bottle of peach tea, right, you'll see natural flavoring or natural flavor, right? It doesn't say peach. No, it says it's a natural flavor, meaning the taste will taste like a natural flavor, but they are using chemistry to create that natural taste. So yes, the flavor is natural, but the product that we're consuming is not natural. So we have to be careful with these natural flavoring labels. Now, there's a difference, for example, between fruit snacks that have artificial coloring, artificial flavoring, that poisonous high fructose corn syrup, and real grapes, real apple slices, real bananas, real melons, right? Fruit snacks versus melon slices. We would be better to have the melon slice, right? But the fruit snack gives us that high, that excitement when we eat it, but it also puts the damage in our bodies from the poisonous sugar, the poisonous coloring, and the poisonous flavoring, right? So these foods have so many ingredients, and most of them are not good for us. Now, a grape doesn't have a food label. Your lettuce doesn't have a food label. Our tomatoes and our peppers, they don't have food labels, right? And so companies can't own, right? They can't trademark. They can't patent a grape. They can't patent an apple. They can't patent pepper, right? These are foods that are naturally occurring. And even though some of them are hybrids, we know that most of the fruit that we eat are not in their natural form, right? The bananas that we eat don't have seeds, but natural bananas do have seeds. And I should add that, our melons and our fruit that we eat, it is better that they do have seeds so that we understand or we know that we're eating foods that are closer to nature than those that are processed or hybridized to be seedless. However, I will tell you, a seedless watermelon or a seedless grape is far better for us than a fruit snack with the mystery ingredients. So when we see foods that are labeled with unrecognizable ingredients that are made in a chemistry lab, we should understand that that's really not fit for human consumption. It's certainly not fit for us if we want to maintain our good health, right? And if we were to compare the calories in in an apple, right? An apple has about a medium unpeeled apple with the great covering, which is the apple skin that is so good for us. That has about 95 calories, right? But 3 Oreos has about 168 calories. Now, how many apples can we sit and eat before we say, oh no, I've had enough? Versus how many Oreos can we sit and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until we looked up and said, man, I can't believe I ate so many of these cookies. Now, I'll also add the apple is not ultra processed, refined, intoxicated to make it addictive. Yes, our food is being made with addictive components. The saying that Lay's potato chips has, which is so clever you can't eat just one, well, why not? What's in it that's making us reach into that bag over and over and over again? Now, if you took a white potato or a sweet potato or a purple potato and you roasted it and you baked it and you ate it and you would be full, we don't say white potato, you can't eat just one. But what happens between picking the potato from the earth and then processing it into a chip that's full of fat, sugars, and salt? And then they can label it and say you can't eat just one. And they're right. There's something to it that we may not understand, but that we should know, right? And so ultimately, eating home-cooked meals of whole foods, real foods, is so much better for us. It's so much more nutritional. It's so much more healthy. And so that should be our goal. We should know the difference between real foods and food products. We should understand the labeling on the foods that we're eating or the products that we're pulling off the shelves. And we should make sure that we're teaching our children as they grow so that they understand when we are putting an apple in front of them instead of a fruit snack, that they understand that mom or dad is, feeding them or fueling them so that they can be strong and healthy, right? And not weak, sick, or frail from the poisons that are in these processed foods. Now, in future episodes, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be discussing more about the processed food ingredients so that we can understand what it is that we should be eating. We will talk about how to re-engineer our taste buds so that we will accept and like and find pleasure in eating the real foods instead of the fake foods. I remember once switching with working with an organization and having a meal at the end of the meeting and switching from processed iced tea mix to real natural tea. I grew up drinking iced tea from tea bags, and I always loved that. And for whatever reason, we were serving the processed tea or the box or the mix that comes. I think it was a Four Seasons tea. And then one day we said, let's read these labels. And we said, oh, no, we can't feed the people this. And so we switched to natural tea. And to my surprise, rather, it was disliked. These people did not like this change. And I just thought, now, isn't that something? We're giving the people something real and natural and authentic, but the preference was for the artificial, which lets me know we have to re-engineer our taste buds for real food, to have a preference and an enjoyment of real food. And in future episodes, we're going to talk about how the processing food industry is causing disease. And they're causing disease that profit the pharmaceutical conglomerate. I mentioned earlier the Food and Drug Administration. And it would be interesting to understand what the food industry will have to do with the drug industry, right? And we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about how we can protect our health and protect our dollars. Now, after everything that I just shared, talking about real food versus food products, you might be thinking, well, man, Nora, what can we eat? What can I feed my children? Well, there's a lot that we can eat. We just have to know what foods are good for us and where to get them and how to prepare them. And we will talk about that in future episodes. Now, I understand that this information may feel overwhelming. And you may, from listening to this episode, think, yeah, I have to change this. And, we may be excited to make a big change all at once. But I would say take your time and make gradual changes, even if you do want to finish out what it is that you have stocked in your pantry. But then as you restock your pantry going grocery shopping, instead of buying the ultra processed foods, you will start buying those foods that are minimally processed. Now, I'll add that buying foods that are whole and minimally processed may mean that you're going to be shopping more often because those foods spoil, right? Natural foods spoil because they don't have those added ingredients that give them the longer shelf life. And that's okay. We'll just have to increase how many times we go shopping. But don't feel in a rush. Don't overwhelm yourself and your family by trying to make a change all at once. Take your time. Take your time and be intentional as you're changing and altering how you and your family are eating. Now, I hope that you haven't listened to this episode and said, well, it is what it is. I'm going to just keep doing what I've been doing. If what you've been doing is eating a lot of processed and ultra processed foods. If we would not put soybean oil in the gas tanks of our car because it's incompatible with our car, then we shouldn't be putting these products that are incompatible with our health and our longevity and our wellness and our bodies. Let's not take our car, that machine, more seriously than we take the machine of our bodies. These poisons and these toxins that are the ultra-processed foods, they are compatible with the food industry cartel making billions of dollars from our uninformed choices. Now we have to make an investment in our health. Again, I'll repeat, as I said at the beginning of this episode, ultra-processed foods are linked to increased risk of cancer, of diabetes, of cardiovascular disease, of dementia and Alzheimer's, of depression and anxiety, and pose serious risk to the health and wellness and our longevity. So it's time that we make informed choices. And that's what this podcast is really about, is informing our people so that we have information and are armed with it so that we can make better choices and have better outcomes. We talk about how Black men have, when they develop prostate cancer, they develop the most aggressive and deadly forms of the cancer. We know when Black women get breast cancer, we're more likely to die from breast cancer, right? Now, our environment, yes, it is polluted with toxins, right? We're living with a toxic people, but we can still make healthy choices about what we're putting in our bodies. And maybe in a future episode, I'll talk about fasting and how fasting is so good for us, and it helps us regenerate ourselves, and it helps our body fight disease and fight cancer cells so that they don't proliferate and really harm our bodies. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Until next time, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property and to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. What I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, norahmuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@norahspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.